At 27, Ayaan believed life had forgotten him. Every morning, he'd sit by the window of his small room, a silent observer of a world that seemed to be moving on without him. He watched people rush to work, their faces filled with purpose. He heard children laughing on their way to school, their futures bright and enwritten. Dreams were happening all around him, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. His were gathering dust in a corner of his heart. Just a year ago, everything that mattered to him had vanished. His job, a career he had poured his soul into, was gone. His relationship, a love he thought would last forever, had ended. And with them, his confidence, the very belief in himself, had crumbled to pieces. Each loss arrived without a sound, like a door closing softly but locking you out forever. At first, he fought back with a spirit that surprised even himself. He repeated mantras of patience and hope. Just hold on, he'd tell his reflection. Things will get better, they have to. But days bled into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. Hope, once a roaring fire, was now just a faint, flickering ember, growing tired of the fight. One evening, the silence of his empty room felt heavier than usual. Exhausted by the relentless struggle and filled with a quiet anger, Ayaan whispered into the darkness, "Why? Why does everything keep going wrong?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, echoing the emptiness he felt inside. The world outside his window continued its hurried pace, oblivious to the man whose life had come to a complete standstill. He felt invisible, a ghost in his own story. The loneliness was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He wondered if anyone else had ever felt this lost, this completely and utterly alone. A few weeks later, just when the silence had become his only companion, his phone rang. It was a call from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in ages. The friend offered him a temporary job. It was nothing special, nothing glamorous. The work was manual, physically demanding, and the pay was barely enough to cover his bills. The future it promised was just as uncertain as the one he was already living. But Ayaan accepted without hesitation. He had learned a hard lesson in the preceding months: pride doesn't pay the rent. So, he showed up, day after day, trading his old ambition for simple survival. One rainy afternoon, as he was walking home from work, soaked and tired, he saw an elderly man struggling to cross a busy road. Cars sped past, their drivers indifferent, caught in their own rush. A wave of something instinct, empathy, perhaps just a flicker of his old self washed over Ayaan. Without a second thought, he ran into the street, held up his hand to stop the traffic, and carefully guided the man to the other side. The man, safe on the pavement, smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thank you, young man," he said, his voice gentle. "You remind me of my son." They stood there for a few minutes, sheltered from the rain under a shop awning. The man asked Ayaan about his life. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ayaan told the truth. He didn't try to paint a rosy picture or pretend everything was fine. He spoke about the losses, the failures, the gnawing fear that he would never find his way back. He laid his broken pieces out for this kind stranger to see. The old man listened without interruption, his gaze steady and compassionate. When Ayaan finished, the man didn't offer empty platitudes or cheap advice. Instead, he said something simple, yet profound. Something that would echo in Ayaan's mind for years to come. He said, "Life doesn't take things away to punish us. Sometimes it removes what we have so it can give us what we need." Ayaan nodded politely, appreciating the sentiment, but the words didn't fully sink in. How could losing everything be a gift? It felt more like a cruel joke. He thanked the man and they parted ways, to strangers who had shared a brief moment in the rain. Days turned into another week, and continued his routine, the old man's words a distant memory. Then, something unexpected happened. The elderly man from the rainy street showed up at Ayaan's workplace. It turned out he wasn't just a random person, he was the owner of the entire company. A successful entrepreneur known for his quiet philanthropy. He had come looking for the young man who had shown him such kindness. Within weeks, Ayaan's life began to change course. He was offered a permanent position, a real job with a future. It was a role that challenged him. that utilized skills he thought he'd lost. But it was more than just the job. Something fundamental inside him had shifted. He started to look back at the wreckage of his past year, not with bitterness, but with a dawning sense of understanding. He realized, if he hadn't lost his prestigious old job, he would never have taken the temporary one. He would never have been on that street at that exact moment, on that rainy afternoon. He would never have met the old man. If his long-term relationship hadn't ended, he would never have been forced to confront his own insecurities, to learn how to stand firmly on his own 2 feet. If life hadn't completely broken him down, he would never have discovered the incredible strength that lay dormant within him, the resilience he never knew he possessed. Each closed door had, in its own way, guided him down a path he needed to walk. One night, not long after, Ayaan found himself back at his window. He looked out at the same city, the same rushing cars, the same distant city lights. The world outside hadn't changed at all. But he had. Everything looked different because he was different. For the first time in a very, very long time, a genuine smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of peace, of acceptance. Because he finally, truly understood. Not every delay is a denial of your dreams. Not every loss is a permanent failure. And not every closed door is the end of the journey. Sometimes, life is just clearing the path, making room, and preparing you for something far greater than you ever imagined for yourself. And sometimes, everything really does happen for a reason. Thank you for watching.